Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of the Read and Reaction podcast. Actually going to do another episode later in the week previewing next weekend. This episode is going to strictly cover week 2 reactions. We'll go over all the scores from this past weekend in college football. Of course, we always start with the Florida Gators. And like I said last week, for more detail on this one, be sure to check out our analysis on Stand Up and Holler. But I'll give you our big takeaways of Florida's 42-20 win over the USF Bulls in Tampa. Late cover by the Bulls. Can't break that pattern, huh? We can't break that pattern. We're going to let them cover late. That's just a thing we like to do with those big spreads the last couple seasons here. But I walked away from this game with no questions as to whether or not Richardson is the better quarterback in the room here. Emory Jones, I actually thought he played significantly better in this game against USF. He made his mistakes. He threw those interceptions. I know a lot of y'all online here are pretty tough on the guy, but he's not a bad quarterback. He has limitations that Anthony Richardson just doesn't seem to have. There's just a difference in the playing level, and there's no doubt about that. I'm not advocating for him to start over Richardson. I'm just saying he didn't play all that bad at times last week when he wasn't making mistakes. If you look at his mistakes, makes a few of them, but outside of that, he's making some decent plays. The offense, it puts up 666 total yards. Dan Mullen's 100th career win, by the way. 300 pass, 300 split approximately there. Pretty even split on both. It wasn't a heavy run or heavy pass day. Saw a lot of big explosive plays out of this offense, which is what you want to see against a rebuilding USF team. But like I said, South Florida managed to cover late on a late punt return. We also saw a couple of those turnovers by Emory set up the defense to give up a couple touchdowns, or a touchdown and a field goal rather. But so the defense wasn't exactly helped by some of the mistakes on the offense and special teams. But overall, the biggest story of the day is simply how bad was the hamstring tweak that Anthony Richardson suffered on his 80-yard touchdown run. How much will it impact his ability to play at full speed against Alabama? The good news is it seems like he's going to play based on the little bit of chatter you're hearing out there. But I've pulled the hamstring before. It is not something that you just bounce right back from. You might be able to get some strength back by this weekend, but in terms of playing 100%, the other thing too, when you have an injured hamstring, it's one of those things that's really easy to re-injure. So I know Will Miles even threw it out there on Stand Up and Holler, but if it were the type of thing where Dan Mullen weighed the benefit of him having to sit for a week to get that thing healthy so that he could be available for LSU and Georgia and everything down the line, do you do that? That's definitely a question you got to ask this week. Overall, though, I mean, you just every time the guy touches the ball, you say, wow, though, right? And when he pulled up as he was running in for an 80-yard touchdown, when he pulled up and grabbed that hammy, I was just I let out the biggest exhale, like, oh, you got to be kidding me. I was so looking forward to seeing him play at 100% against Bama. Even if he plays, you know he's not going to be 100%. So that's a tough blow to the Gators there. And you definitely have to think that it's on Emory Jones against Alabama. I know that might not be most fans' preference, but I think that's what we're going to see. We're going to see a lot of Emory Jones against Alabama. All right, let's move on to Friday night's action. You had Coastal Carolina ripping the Kansas Jayhawks 49-22. But the final score, it was, even though it wasn't close, Kansas was actually competitive for part of this one. The Jayhawks led 9-7 at the end of the first quarter, and they were only down a touchdown in the third quarter before Coastal Carolina pulled away. Positive signs for a program digging out of a deep hole in the Lance Leipold era, but Coastal gets the job done, proves the 2-0. They're going on a road trip up to Buffalo, who was one of the better teams in the MAC last year. They're coming off a loss to Nebraska, though. But Coastal Carolina at Buffalo, if you like a good group of 5 game next week, that would be one to keep an eye on. While we are checking out some lower levels of football here, let's go to the FCS and check out Kevin Kelly and the Presbyterian Blue Hose. We're going to be tracking them all season long on this podcast. Fascinated by the coach who never punts out of Little Rock, Arkansas, stepping up, taking that job at Presbyterian College. And once again, after putting up 84 points last week, we see them put up 68 this week. The quarterback, the starter, goes 22 of 35. 309 yards passing, 4 touchdowns. Saw a few more mistakes in this one, couple interceptions, 7 of 7 for the backup, 108 yards and 2 touchdowns. But once again, just a lot of explosive plays, a lot of fun to watch this style of football. I could get it on ESPN Plus. If you have ESPN Plus, you can stream those games if you ever want to. But big plays all over the board. If the Blue Hose have an explosive season, I really think this style of football is going to get a little more attention next year at the college level. Not saying everyone's going to jump to it right away, but it's proving that it's working to some extent here. So let's keep an eye on it. We'll see how it goes. Presbyterian plays Campbell this next week. We'll be keeping an eye on the battle with the Campbell Camels, man. All right, the Mercer Bears travel to Alabama, and the Crimson Tide end up winning 48-14, but the Bears actually forced 2 Alabama punts before the Crimson Tide scored on a block punt, which was returned for a touchdown. Interception by Bama corner Kool-Aid McKitstry, set up Bryce Young and the offense to break through and score a touchdown with just over 3 minutes left in the first quarter. The Tide never looked back. They end up rolling to a 31-0 halftime lead after a bit of a slow start there. Mercer ends up connecting on touchdown passes of 60 and 22 yards to get on the board in the second half. But Bama wins this one, like I said, 48-14. Next up, we got a trip to the swamp for the Alabama Crimson Tide. I got an interview coming up with an Alabama insider this week, as well as a special edition of a Stand Up and Holler on Wednesday that will be released, where we will exclusively preview the Florida-Alabama game. Be sure to check it out here on the Read and Reaction YouTube channel. Up next, the number 2 Georgia Bulldogs just steamrolled UAB out of Conference USA. This is not a bad UAB team. They got an unexpected edge coming into this game, but UAB did, with Stetson Bennett being declared the starter in place of injured QB JT Daniels, who ended up missing the game with an oblique issue. But they were sorely mistaken if they thought that was going to be any kind of advantage. Stetson Bennett, who started several games for the Dogs in 2020, ends up opening his day through the air with a 73-yard touchdown pass to Jermaine Burton. He finished the day with 288 yards passing and 5 touchdowns. Not bad for Stetson Bennett. UGA ends up rolling out to a 56-0 lead before a fourth quarter touchdown by UAB when things really did not matter anymore. Bulldogs defense, were they as stifling as last week? Yes. Just as suffocating. End up holding UAB to 127 total yards rushing and 47 yards passing with 3 interceptions. So that's 127 rushing, 47 passing with 3 interceptions. Woo, Georgia, they got the nice schedule set up. They got that road game at Auburn, like I pointed out last week, but I am of the belief they will be entering the cocktail party undefeated. So it looks like it doesn't even matter if JT Daniels is on the field or not. Georgia can click a little bit there without the USC transfer. Saw a big upset early in the day, big noon kickoff. Oregon goes into the Horseshoe. Of course, we had Ryan Winter on previewing the show last week. If y'all want to check that out on our channel here. Oregon 35, Ohio State 28. And for anyone decrying the repetitious nature of the college football playoff, I've been one of them. You'll be happy to hear that the Oregon Ducks, winners of the first ever playoff game, have put themselves in great position to secure another playoff spot while traveling across the nation and shredding a struggling Ohio State defense for a well-balanced 505 yards en route to a 35-28 victory over the Buckeyes in Columbus. The Buckeyes don't lose in that horseshoe too much, folks. It doesn't happen too much. The Buckeyes will have to run the table to have a shot at the playoff spot. They're definitely not eliminated at this point, but the Ducks not only gained some national respect for their own program, they've been on a little bit of a soul-searching process since the days of Mariota. Probably the biggest win since they've had since that playoff victory over Florida State in the Rose Bowl. But really the Pac-12, it's been a while since the Pac-12 has gotten any respect, and that was good level of respect for the Pac-12 with a win in this game. So I guess they're not honoring the Alliance too much there. Alliance be damned. But Mario Cristobal's Ducks, they go in, they play a clean game while the Buckeyes are still trying to find their identity in the post-Justin Fields era. Opening drive in the third quarter allowed the Ducks to run the score up to 21-7. And from that point forward, the Buckeyes were just trying in vain to play catch-up all afternoon. It just never felt like they could get their feet under them at any point when you were watching this one. Oregon impressed all day. And for the most part, they were methodical in their approach. I mean, their 5 touchdown drives covered the length of 99 yards, 65 yards, 84 yards, 75 and 74 yards, respectively, with only one of those consisting of less than 6 total plays. The defense, on the other hand, withstood the Buckeye onslaught in the second half, forcing a punt and an interception on 2 critical fourth quarter drives after surrendering 3 touchdowns and 4 drives throughout the third and early fourth quarters to bring the Buckeyes back within 1 score. So that was solid that Oregon ended up holding on to that lead they had built up. Oregon's biggest regular season test remaining, road games to Stanford, UCLA, and Washington. Quite doable for this Ducks team, who easily have the most talented roster in the Pac-12. I know USC's up there too, but we saw what they did. I'll get to USC in a bit here. So I expect Oregon to be firmly in this playoff race throughout the season. You got to think that they need to run the table in the Pac-12 still, but definitely a huge advantage after going into Columbus and getting this win. UCLA took care of business at home against LSU last week. Got to think the Pac-12, if they didn't earn your respect at home, they definitely earned some respect in the eyes of this year's playoff committee. I think that's a fair statement to make. Let's move on to Norman, Oklahoma. Oklahoma 76, Western Carolina, coached by Kerwin Bell, former Florida Gators quarterback, 0. Really just want to check in. How'd Spencer Rattler look? 20 of 26, 246 yards, or 248 yards. 243 yards. Gotta get the eyes checked. Sorry about that. 5 touchdowns and no interceptions. Much cleaner performance from the shaky opener against Tulane. Maybe put himself back in the Heisman race. Going to matter more what he does in the big games. Of course, Oklahoma has Nebraska coming into Norman this next week here. That'll be another good test for that Nebraska program to really see where they stand. And hope that they don't get blown out too much in that one. But Rattler could definitely get on track because he will be in front of the nation with that game. Texas A&M goes to Denver. They did not play this game in Boulder. This was actually at I don't know if they're still calling it Invesco Field at Mile High, but where the Broncos play. Texas A&M 10-7 over Colorado. That's another battle for the Pac-12 right there. The Pac-12 almost pulling off another upset. But the day started on a high note for A&M in this one. Blitz led to a hit on the quarterback as he's releasing the ball, and an interception landed in the hands of big defensive lineman Jaden Peavy. Quarterback Haynes King, renowned throughout the offseason here. People have been very excited to see him. We saw him throw 3 interceptions in his opener. Ends up getting hurt. They just called it a lower leg injury. Scrambles on a 3rd down. Gets basically body slammed. It was a pretty tough tackle. And he ends up coming back on the field later on with just crutches and a boot on the right foot. So thinking that's going to be something that might keep him out for a little bit of time, at least if he's rocking the crutches and the boot. Backup quarterback Zach Calzada comes in, and A&M struggles. They struggle throughout this game. They failed to register a first down until 122 in the second quarter, the 122 before halftime, when Calzada completed a pass to Isaiah Spiller for 15 yards. So this was not by any means a smooth transition. The Aggies would end up turning that first down into a field goal to trail Colorado 7-3 at the half. A&M opens the second half with 3 straight punts before finally putting together a drive that gets them down inside the Colorado 20-yard line. With 8:45 remaining in the fourth quarter, Calzada took off around the right edge, and as he's lunging for the end zone, he was hit, loses the ball in the end zone. Colorado recovers for the touchback, but clearly the confidence was there for him after that drive because the Aggies force a 3-and-out. They give the ball back to their young quarterback. He takes them right down the field again, 77-yard drive in clutch timing, just over a 5-minute drive, ends up finding running back Isaiah Spiller. Gator fans, we know him well, on a wheel route for their first touchdown of the game with 2:41 remaining. The Aggie defense holds on downs, and Texas A&M survives a 10-7 game to improve to 2-0. My pick this weekend was for Texas A&M to cover 17 in this one. The talk all offseason had been about whether or not the Aggies are chasing Alabama. How close are they to catching the Tide in the West? I put my mindset out there to say, if A&M thinks they're close to catching Alabama, which I'll bet you people around that program have some level of confidence that they're getting close, whether or not it's delusional, we'll see here. But I basically said if Alabama went out to Colorado, would you worry about them covering 17? No. So the Aggies go out there. I know they lose their quarterback in this one, but I think even with Alabama's backup quarterback, they're probably covering 17 pretty easily. This one looked like a lot of work for this A&M team, and maybe we need to stop making making the chatter about Bama. Hopefully, that foot for Haynes King is okay. As I do believe Bama does. They come into Texas A&M in the middle of October at some point. So hopefully their starter gets back and they at least get a shot with him. But I don't know. Based on what we saw against Colorado, I'm not sure the Aggies are going to be right up there anytime soon. So the question will center around the quarterback, Haynes King, and his lower leg injury, which we have not heard the official we've not heard what it officially is yet. Clemson gets a big win over South Carolina State, 49-3. Cincinnati, 42-7 over Murray State. Notre Dame survives a scare from Toledo, 32-29. Not going to get much in any of those games. Not super exciting stuff there. But Iowa, number 10, the Hawkeyes going to Iowa State. I said it. Don't sleep on the Hawkeyes. How would Iowa State handle the expectations? And based on what you saw on the scoreboard, you'd say not so good, right? The Cyclones, they did hang tough early, but an interception at midfield set up one Hawkeyes touchdown and a punt on the ensuing possession, set up another, allowing Iowa to jump out to a 14-3 lead in the first half. Iowa State answers with a drive of their own, score a touchdown right before halftime, narrows it to 14-10, and it will remain that way until the later stages of the third quarter when 3 consecutive Iowa State turnovers tanked the day and handed the Hawkeyes 13 free points. The late Cyclones touchdown brought the score to 27-17, but this is just a missed opportunity for Matt Campbell's team. Iowa State ends up turning it over on the day 4 times to Iowa's 0. And despite holding the Hawkeyes under 200 yards of total offense, the Cyclones lose their 6th straight to Kirk Ferentz and the Iowa Hawkeyes. The Hawkeyes might be a quiet playoff team here. I mean, this is a big win in non-conference. Iowa State had a lot of expectations all summer long. You hear about Iowa State. They're sick of it. And out west in the Big Ten, you play Wisconsin. I'm looking ahead here on their schedule. I think they're guaranteed to jump out to about a 5-0 record with home date with Penn State in mid-October is maybe their first biggest threat. But they have Kent State, Colorado State, who we just saw lost to Vanderbilt, and Maryland the next 3 games. That's a 5-0 stretch, and you're probably easily working your way up toward the top 5 for the Iowa Hawkeyes in the next month here. So keep an eye on Iowa as maybe a playoff contender heading into the fall. Stanford goes into Los Angeles, beats USC by 2 touchdowns, and it wasn't even that close. Nathaniel Pete's 87-yard touchdown run was the first of 3 first-half TDs for the Cardinal offense that was nearly non-existent against Kansas State last week. USC cannot keep pace. They end up falling behind 42-13 early in the fourth quarter. And I'm telling you, the Stanford team played terribly against Kansas State last week. I cannot stress that enough. 42-13 deficit for USC in the fourth quarter. 2 late touchdowns bring the score back up to a range of respectability. But the Cardinals, they just cruising this one. The Cardinals, just no problem. Not even a challenge from the Trojans. Last week, I questioned whether or not the Stanford program had hit a wall under the leadership of David Shaw. Good win for Shaw. Good win for the Cardinal. Way to get after it. But is this the one that finally puts Clay Helton over the top? Is this the one that finally breaks the camel's back there out in USC? It just seems like he finds a way to survive year in and year out. But this loss, not a pretty one for a USC team that played in the Pac-12 championship game last year. Got to be disappointing in this one. Got to be disappointed in this one if you're a Trojans fan. Speaking of disappointment, Texas, they go up to Fayetteville and just get crushed. I wanted to trust them after the opening week. I said, look how well they did against this Louisiana team. Arkansas struggled in their opener. I said, after what I saw in week 1, not good enough, Arkansas. You were my preseason. This was going to be my preseason upset pick in week 2. I couldn't do it. I thought Texas looked too good in week 1. I said, they're going to figure out, they're going to handle their business going up to Arkansas. They did not. Sam Pittman has the Hogs about to jump into the rankings most likely after a 40-21 victory over Texas. I watched this game. I had to change it. It got too boring at some point. It was just like Arkansas just controlled the game from start to finish. The Hogs run wild over the Longhorns. 333 rushing yards for an Arkansas team that physically dominated Sarkisian's Longhorns. Texas wasn't much better on offense. They only ended up managing to rack up 256 total yards, 118 of those passing. And Casey Thompson will now be starting for the Longhorns heading into next week. Look for a ranked Arkansas team to take the field. Think about when Sam Pittman was hired before 2020, and he's already got the Hogs ranked in 2021. Amazing job. They're playing Georgia Southern next week, and Pittman's Woo Pig Suey should be rolling into the polls this week. SEC West, just a quick check-in. Heisman favorite, in my opinion, quarterback Matt Corral. Ole Miss, 54-17 over Austin Peay. Looks like they got some different playing time for some different quarterbacks out there in Oxford this weekend. Corral ends up throwing for 281 yards and 5 touchdowns and some reduced work before giving way to the second string as Ole Miss rolls to an easy win over the FCS Governors. Utah goes to BYU, and the Cougs, they surprised us. I thought Utah was going to win this game. I picked them to cover a 7-point spread, but Utah turned the ball over on their first 2 possessions of the game, and they found themselves down 16-7 at the half. BYU managed to keep the Utes out of the end zone again until the 9.5-minute mark in the fourth quarter, and the Cougars ride a strong defensive performance to the finish line to top in-state rival Utah in the Holy War, 26-17. Nice win for a BYU program there. Miami hosts Appalachian State. Biggest question we had here, right? Did Bama break them? We wanted to see it. And for parts of the game, looked like maybe, but you got to give App State respect at this point. No, I don't think anyone thought this game would be a total pushover. This was kind of a, hey, get the job done, go ahead and win. App State is better than some of the teams that play in the ACC, let's be real. Miami ends up getting the win, 25-23 over the Mountaineers. And really, you saw, despite the fact that it was a competitive game on the field, you saw more highlights about the cat falling out of the stands. If you haven't seen it yet, there was a cat dangling from the top tier of the deck, had jumped out onto a wire, was hanging on by a wire, and a couple of students at Miami had gotten under the cat. They had an American flag at the game, and they used the American flag to catch the cat. They spread it out, and they used it to catch the cat as it ended up falling from that second level all over YouTube and Twitter, TikTok, everything this weekend. So if you haven't seen the cat highlight, be sure to check it out. On the field, though, like I said, Miami ends up handling the scare from App State, and they kick a 43-yard field goal with just over 2 minutes remaining to improve to 1-1 on the season. Nice bounce back for the Canes. Wasn't overly impressive at any point, but App State, good program. We get to see the Canes get another big test next week as Michigan State comes into Miami. And again, this Michigan State program has been down for a couple of years, but Mel Tucker's got them playing well. They went up, they smoked the Big Ten West champs in Northwestern to open the season on Friday night, and they took care of business last Saturday against Youngstown State in East Lansing. To round out the top 25 here, Auburn, 62, Alabama State, nothing. Just wanted to point out that Auburn scored 62 points while Bo Nix threw for a total of 108 yards. Heavily on the ground here is where the Tigers were working. Jarquez Hunter runs for 147 yards. Tank Bigsby adds another 122 to give the Tigers a 364-yard day on the ground. Auburn has outscored their first 2 opponents, Akron and Alabama State, 122-10. But next up, a trip into the Lions' Den, Happy Valley, wideout, Penn State for a rare Big Ten SEC regular season matchup. Love this. Forget these Atlanta games. Forget the Dallas games. Do more of this, college football, please. Give me some home and homes. Auburn going into Penn State. I love to see it. We'll be watching it next Saturday night. South Carolina at East Carolina. The Gamecocks escaped East Carolina with a 20-17 victory. A pick six overshadowed South Carolina's 3 turnovers on offense in the first half there, and allowed the Gamecocks to cut the deficit to 14-7 before halftime. The 2 teams traded punts on 6 straight drives to start the second half, so a lot of fun to watch there. But South Carolina ends up scoring 13 points late, including a last-second field goal to outlast the Pirates 20-17. Frank Beamer gets a 2-0 start, but Georgia is looming, and I think we know what's coming in that one. Pitt survives Tennessee 41-34, and really kudos to Tennessee in this one. I said that this is the game that we're going to find out just how much rebuilding Tennessee has to do. And by no means, it's not that saying that Pitt is any type of standard, but Pitt has been a solid, productive ACC bowl program on a regular basis the last several years. They're producing NFL talent under Pat Narduzzi. I know they don't get a lot of shine on a national level, but you look at those rosters the last few years, and it's been stacked with talent, particularly on the defensive side of the ball, that is getting plenty of attention from NFL scouts. Tennessee, they end up standing up. They were competitive for much of the game here. This was never really a blowout at any point. The Vols actually jumped out to a 10-0 lead, and they, like I said, they hung tough throughout against a more established Pitt program. Pitt started slow, ends up scoring 27 points on 5 consecutive drives in the second quarter to take control of the game. The Volunteers, they get Tennessee Tech next week before traveling down to face the Florida Gators in the Swamp. So good. Really, I think that's an encouraging win. Or that's an encouraging game for Tennessee. Sorry, got to get that out. Sorry about that. Rutgers goes to Syracuse and comes away with a 17-7 win. It wasn't pretty, but since when do you complain about Rutgers winning pretty? Just a win is a win is a win. And Rutgers, they improved to 2-0. It was 0-0 at halftime. The Scarlet Knights, they would only manage 51 yards on 43 rushing attempts. 50 yards on 43 rushing attempts. But Greg Schiano's defense forces 5 turnovers for a second consecutive week. They did it against Temple last week as well. 4 fumbles recovered in this one versus Syracuse. And the Knights will have a shot to improve to 3-0 when the Delaware Blue Hens come up to Jersey next weekend. And then it's off to Ann Arbor for some Big Ten football. Rutgers' schedule picks up real quick. I think it's like they play Ohio State, Michigan State back-to-back weeks. So it's going to get real quick for Rutgers. TCU was an 11-point favorite over Cal this weekend. I didn't really understand that. Maybe the lack of offense on the side of things. Cal gave them that, but Cal fought them throughout. TCU comes away with a 34-32 win. We saw a tight game in the Cheez-It Bowl, but that Cheez-It Bowl a couple years ago, that Cheez-It Bowl defensive slugfest is now a distant memory as these two put up a ton of points, almost 950 yards of total offense combined between them this past Saturday. On the opening drive, TCU stuffed Cal at 4th and 1 on the 7-yard line, on their own 7-yard line. So Cal was driving inside the TCU 7 and could have had a field goal. They end up going for it, get stuffed. They lose by 2. This game ends up going back and forth down to the wire, but TCU manages to piece together back-to-back touchdown drives in the fourth quarter to eke out a 34-32 win against Justin Wilcox and the Cal Bears. Tough losses for them to open the season against Nevada and TCU. Not many teams go back-to-back in tough games to open the season, so kudos to Cal for scheduling it that way. On September 11th here, we had Air Force face Navy. Air Force ends up getting the better of Navy in this one. We saw 81 combined yards passing on 6 completions in this game. Obviously, both teams run the triple option, so you don't see a ton of passing anyway, but 81 combined total yards. Navy, though, only manages to gain an uncharacteristic 36 yards on the ground for a grand total of 68 total yards of offense on the day. 23-3 Falcons. Let's go back to the SEC. Mississippi State, bit of a surprise here. Struggled with Louisiana Tech, ends up putting together a 21-point fourth quarter comeback to steal a win against the Bulldogs. They welcomed the Wolfpack into Starkville and just dominated this game. They only rushed for 22 yards on the day. NC State wasn't much better at 32. The Wolfpack, though, turned the ball over. Mississippi State did not. That ends up giving the Bulldogs the edge, and they end up taking this game 24-10. NC State was kept out of the end zone until the fourth quarter. And really a good win for Mike Leach in building this Bulldogs program. They improved to 2-0 as they head to the Liberty Bowl next week against Memphis. That should be an interesting game. I believe that's on at 4 o'clock, so I don't know how many Gator fans will be watching. We'll check in on the highlights on that. Missouri goes to Kentucky, battles down the stretch. Kentucky's all of a sudden this entertaining football team. You better pay attention. Don't write that one off. It's going to be a tough one up in Lexington. I mean, hopefully the Gators whoop up on Bama Saturday and do this, but they got a quarterback that can play some ball now up there at Kentucky. It looks like 14-0 Kentucky start did not deter Mizzou from tying things up at 28 early in the fourth quarter, though. And the tie was short-lived because on the next drive, Cats running back Chris Rodriguez broke a 28-yard run down the Missouri 36-yard line. 2 plays later, Will Levis, the transfer quarterback from Penn State, completes a 28-yard pass to the Mizzou 8. Rodriguez finishes up the drive with an 8-yard touchdown run. Wildcats go up 35-28 with about 11 and a half minutes remaining. The Tigers, they only threatened one more time, really, but quarterback Connor Bazelak could not convert on a fourth down from the Kentucky 45, and the Cats were able to run the clock out, end up securing an SEC East victory, 35-28 over Missouri at home. Good win for Kentucky in that one. Let's go down to the Bayou and check in on LSU coming off that loss to UCLA. LSU 34-7 over McNeese State. I would call this game a workman-like performance. Nothing flashy. 34-7 over Coach O's son, Cody Ogeron, who started at quarterback for McNeese State. McNeese State's lone touchdown was a 44-yard pass from Cody Ogeron to Carlos Williams. LSU's old friend, Jim McElwain, our old friend too in Gainesville, ends up bringing down – he's going to bring down the Central Michigan Chippewas for a trip to Death Valley next weekend. We remember how well LSU got along with the Jim McElwain administration during his time at the University of Florida. So McElwain gets a shot at LSU. Jacksonville State goes into Tallahassee and does the unthinkable, beating Florida State 20-17. It's no matter how bad you are. We obviously saw it in Gainesville. I don't need to name the specific example. I don't even like talking about it. We know how bad this feels. We know how bad this feels in Gainesville, but to lose it on a Hail Mary, does that make it worse? I feel like it might, because that's just an extra level of devastation. To lose anything on a Hail Mary is just extra devastating. Jacksonville State strikes first with the 7-0 lead. And then we've seen FSU. They fought off a couple of these teams in down years. We saw it with Troy one year, Louisiana Monroe. Those come to mind off the top of my head. So really no big deal, right? They're going to handle their business. That's what I thought after FSU took a 17-7 lead with less than 5 minutes left in the third quarter. Florida State tries to put the game away with a 15-play, 89-yard drive. And they end up going all the way down to the Jacksonville 1-yard line, but they could not punch it in. They turn it over on downs on the Jacksonville State 3, and Jacksonville State then takes the ball over down 17-7 in the fourth quarter here. This is with about 9 minutes left. They end up taking it on an 11-play, 97-yard touchdown drive that was nearly stopped when Florida State actually intercepted the ball, but the Noles were called for targeting, gives new life to Jack State, and 2 plays later, the Gamecocks score on a 23-yard touchdown pass to Ahmad Edwards. 17-7 FSU with 4:45 remaining. No problem. Give the ball back to Mackenzie Milton. Pressure's on to get a first down or two. He does that. He gets first down, ends up melting 3 minutes off the clock. Only threw for 133 yards in this game, by the way, which was a little mind-blowing after last week. But ends up melting 3 minutes off the clock before punting. Jacksonville State they managed to get 10 plays in the final minute 23 of the game. They worked their way up to their own 41-yard line before the final play of the game, where quarterback Zarek Cooper connects with wide receiver Damon Philyaw Johnson for a 59-yard Hail Mary as time expires. Huge blow to the Mike Norvell regime after an encouraging performance against Notre Dame last week. You thought maybe they'd start to turn a corner this season, take care of business in games they should take care of business in. That should be the mantra this year at Florida State. Just win the ones you should win. I think they're playing Wake Forest next week. Don't screw around with Wake Forest, take care of it. Don't screw around with Jacksonville State, take care of it. Win the ones you should win. And then maybe on some of these other games, no one's really expecting much out of you this year in those games. So if you can at least get the program back to taking care of business in these types of games, that's a positive step in year 2. Jacksonville State, baby. Well, at least we don't have to hear the jokes about 2013 anymore. So The Gator blocking meme, the two Gators blocking each other meme, that one could go away too. We can do away with that one too. So Jacksonville State ends up beating Florida State 20-17 in Tallahassee. Big upset in that one. Washington goes to the big house. They end up getting destroyed by Michigan 31-10. And we saw some old school football out of the Wolverines in this one. They just punched Washington in the mouth. Michigan rushes for 343 yards on 56 attempts while only passing for 44 yards on 7 of 15 passing. Some old school football. I'm sure Harbaugh was just loving life up in Ann Arbor. Washington falls behind 17-0 in the third quarter before they can manage to get on the board. The Wolverines end up tacking on 2 late touchdowns to close things out, and Michigan improves to 2-0 while the Huskies fall to 0-2. Michigan has NIU and Rutgers the next 2 weeks, should get to 4-0 before their trip to Wisconsin. So Michigan putting together a nice little start to the season after a disappointing 2020. Vanderbilt goes out to Colorado State. This ain't an East Tennessee State, baby. They get it done. Vanderbilt, 24-21 over the fighting Steve Adazios. Colorado State started fast in this one, but they missed 2 field goals on good drives early in the game, and they really failed to build on their early 14-0 first half lead. Vandy ends up outscoring Colorado State 24-7 down the stretch and used the last second 38-yard field goal to give Clark Lee his first win as the Vanderbilt head coach. The Commodores come back to Nashville next week to face the Stanford Cardinal. All right, that's the wrap up for week 2 in reactions on the Read and Reaction podcast. I had everything lumped together last week, and that episode was just way too long. So from now on, I like to split them up. We'll do a reaction to the previous week earlier in the week, and we'll do all the previews maybe about like Wednesday, Thursday timeline, probably more toward Thursday, just to give me an extra day to do some of the interviews at times. So looking forward to seeing you on the next episode. Bama week. Let's go.